moisture, a lot of water vapor is going out through those same stomata. As soon as the plant gets its intake of carbon dioxide, so to speak, what happens? The stomata shut down and you don't have nearly as much water loss. Consequently, your grass uses a whole lot less water. That's why putting compost on your yard really reduces your water use. If we put a lot of compost around the root system of a plant, we're going to have a lot of carbon dioxide around the root system of the plant, and the plant's going to do poorly. So we don't want carbon dioxide underneath the plant, whether it's a tree, whether it's a shrub, whether it's grass. We can mix a reasonable amount into the material, the soil around that you're putting around the sides of the plant, but even then, don't overdo it. And when you're using compost, be sure and get finished compost material. If it feels hot to the touch, it's not ready to go into the ground. It's still breaking down, still generating a lot of carbon dioxide, but very important. Again, a lot of people, when you're planting grass, and we'll talk about planting grass, but they think, I really want to improve the soil, so I'm going to put down a layer of compost to put the grass on top of it. Worst possible thing you can do. Plant your grass and then put your compost on top of the grass. Yes, sir?
Is there any advantage to having the soil test in this area? Because most of it seems to be alkaline anyhow.
I've seen 1,000 soil tests, and they're all identical. People come in with a sample of soil and they say, I want a soil test, and I pick it up and say, okay, very low in organic material, pH is around 8.4, potassium's very high, phosphorus moderately high, nitrogen's very low. Here you go, thank you. Because that's what they all come back and say. But, you know, if you're growing a vegetable garden where you may have special soil needs or things like that, I think a soil test may be a good idea. But the standard soil test is a waste of time. If you send one off to A&M, it's a total waste of time. And even A&M admits that they do soil tests improperly. Because what they do is they take your soil and they treat it with a strong acid and a strong base. And they dissolve out everything that's in the soil in the way of phosphate, potassium, nitrates, all the different things that you're looking for. What does that tell you? That tells you what is in the soil, but it doesn't tell you anything at all about what is available to the plants. Because our soils, for instance, are very high in phosphates, but many times our plants may suffer from phosphorus deficiency because that phosphate is rock and the plants can't take it up. Plants here sometimes suffer from calcium deficiency, even though they're sitting on top of limestone, calcium carbonate. If you do want a soil test, the only place to send it is down to Edinburgh, Texas, to Texas Plant and Soils Labs, because Kay Chandler is the man that operates that lab, and he does a soil test the way a plant does a soil test. The way a plant does a soil test, you know, I told you the root system of the plant takes in oxygen, gives off carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide that it gives off from its root system reacts with water in the soil and gives you something called carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is a very mild acid that kind of leaches away at what's in the soil, dissolves it, and makes it available to the plant. You send a soil sample down to Texas Plant and Soil Labs, they use a carbonic acid extraction method, and they will tell you what is in the soil that your plants can get to. And in some cases, for somebody in agriculture, yeah, that's a good thing to know, and it might be useful information to you, but is it critical? Not 1 out of 100 times, probably. If it's of interest to you, do it. You'll pay about $45 for a good soil test. Everybody says that's expensive. If you ask A&M to test for the same things that Kay's testing for, it'd be $78. So a $5 soil test is nothing but throwing $5 away. It's going to give you no useful information. If you really want a good soil test, send it to TPSL. And if you're really serious about this, send him 2 soil samples. Take one at the surface of the soil, take another one 12 inches down. He does this in agriculture all the time because even a lot of farmers, you know, they go out and they scoop up a little bit of soil and say we're going to send it off to the lab and see what it's missing. Well, where are the roots of the plants? They're not up there where he grabbed the soil, they're 12 inches down. In the case of citrus orchards, when he's testing their soil, he tells them take a soil sample 48 inches deep, because that's where the roots are, and that's the only way you're going to get a real honest answer. It's kind of common sense, but most of us would never think of it. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have any type of a formula for mixing your compost with your existing soils?
I generally say about 1/3 compost, 2/3 soil.
So it's the existing soil just to enhance it then?
Yeah. And our existing soils, rocky soil is generally pretty good soil. It's decent soil with some rock mixed in. Caliche, terrible stuff. Caliche is just white clay or black clay, depending on the area that you live in. I live in very rocky soils for the most part in the hill country, and plants grow beautifully. If you want to know how good or how bad the soil is on your lot, around the area that you live, look and see how big the trees are. Look at the oak trees especially. If you live somewhere out north and there are only a few trees, but they're this big around, you've got good soils because the plants are finding fissures in that rock filled with good soil to put their roots into. There are other parts of this town, you walk around, you look at a lot, it's got 60 trees on the lot, and the biggest one's about this big around. Those trees are sitting on a shelf of rock, and you have very little soil to deal with. That's where you better think about berms or raised beds, things like that. My ranch outside of Bernie, I've got one hillside that's covered with mountain laurels, almost like a ground cover. Mountain laurels are probably 60 or 70 years old, they're about this tall. You got about this much soil to grow in. But you can go a quarter of a mile away, I've got deep soil with mountain laurels that are like this. Same plant, just different conditions. But you can look at the plants around an area and tell how much soil there is in a given spot. Above all, when you plant, do not chisel out or jackhammer a hole in the rock to try to be able to get a tree or a big plant into the ground. What have you done? You've created a bathtub. And that hole that you created is going to hold water, and your plants are either going to do poorly or die. So, a couple of things about planting. Yes, sir.
I was wanting to ask you about that last week, and I wanted to ask you afterwards, but if out of my property, I can set a hose down on the ground and turn the hose on, and it'll run about 10, 12 feet, and the water will disappear. And I can do that just about anywhere. In that kind of condition, you still don't want to put a hole in the rock to plant your trees to keep, if you wanted to keep your property level?
I wouldn't, because that that water's going down and going off somewhere else. You create a hole in the rock, that's where it's going to go. If in doubt, if you just want to try it, you can always fill the hole back in. Dig your hole and fill the hole with water before you put the plant in. And if all the water drains on through, then you're fine to plant in that particular spot.
I have a question too.
Yes?
When you're talking about the roots on the bottom and the differences between the top and the bottom, did I hear you say that the plant, when you plant the tree, it would settle?
If you loosen the soil underneath, it will settle.
Well, you will, right? Because you're digging.
No, you're going to dig the hole only as deep as the root ball. You can dig it wider.
Right.
But if that root ball's this tall, you're only digging the hole this deep.
Okay, so then it won't settle.
Then it won't settle.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. When you are planting a plant, especially a tree, a big tree in a small pot is not a bargain. And there are a lot of places around that will sell you. I had somebody, call and ask questions because they gotten bids on something, and he wanted to know whether this was a good price or not. They'd bid him a bunch of 3-inch caliper trees. Was that a good price? And I said, well, are the plants in 15-gallon containers, 40-gallon boxes, 48-inch boxes? What are they in? Well, I don't know. A big tree in a small pot is a very bad investment because that tree has grown a lot of roots, and what are they doing? They're doing this in a pot. And when you plant it, it may look good for just guaranteed to be long enough for the landscaper to leave town. And then they start folding up and dying, and you have no recourse. Number one, if it's a really big tree in a really small pot, I can tell you right now it's a bad investment. Trees should be of reasonable size. When you look at these Montezuma cypress, I would never buy a bigger tree than that in a pot that's that size. And regardless of how big or how small the pot is, I think one of the most important things you do, especially on a tree, is to take a strong bladed knife, but a sharp knife, whether it's a sheetrock knife or machete or whatever else, and slice down one side of the root ball to eliminate any roots that are doing this. When I started in the nursery business a lot of years ago and doing landscaping and things like that, most plants were grown in metal containers, in empty egg cans. One of my jobs when I worked with Alton, I went to Sterling Bakery once a week and picked up 250 of those kind of gold-colored cans. They got frozen eggs in that were this size. We punched holes in the bottom, and that's what we grew our trees and shrubs in. That's what most everybody grew their plant material in. When we sold a shrub or a tree to a customer in that kind of container, we had something called can cutters. There are two metal handles with a little handle coming out on each side, a flat piece, and a little blade that stuck through it like this. And by doing this, you move that blade in and out. You set it down on the edge of the can, you did this to cut it, and then you push down like that, and it just split the side of the can. I know some of you guys are old enough to remember that. All of you young people just smile and worry about us old fogies that, you know, have seen all this sort of stuff. And that is probably the best thing that ever happened to that plant, because no matter how careful we were, that blade that was